I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today is our first test of the new Volkswagen Tayron. This is the biggest sibling to the Tiguan, which we've already tested to some extent here on the channel, and you can find those videos on the Chasing Cars channel. The Tayron is also the replacement for the Tiguan Allspace. The decision to move away from the Allspace name was to differentiate these cars a little bit more. They have more styling differences than in the past, but they're still clearly strongly related vehicles. Now, there's a broad range of Tayrons available here in Australia. The one that I'm starting with today is the 150 TSI Elegance. You can get a fully optioned Elegance out the door for about 70 grand drive away. And as we'll see in today's video, it's a very complete 3-row family car, particularly if you don't want to drive around in a tank, because the dimensions of the Tayron are still fairly compact, although it is definitely noticeably larger than the Tiguan. In today's video, we're going to check out the interior, second and third rows, and the boot of the Tayron. We'll discuss the running costs and my real-world fuel economy test. We'll take a drive in the vehicle, and then I'll give you my verdict about whether the Tayron 150 TSI Elegance is the way to go, or if there might be another sweet spot in the range. But before we get started, hit subscribe. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. Jumping inside the Tayron, what we find is a very similar interior to the Tiguan, but not an identical one. What matters though is that compared to this vehicle's rivals, which are smaller SUVs like the X-Trail and the CR-V, which are available with a tiny third row, and also bigger vehicles like the Santa Fe, Sorento and CX-80, which have sort of a similar sized third row to this car, the Tayron's cabin is pretty nice. Even the base model has things like 4-way power lumbar for the seats and really good infotainment. What we're sitting in here is the 150 TSI Elegance with the Sound and Vision package, which gives you really excellent matrix LED headlights, a 15-inch screen instead of a 12.9-inch screen, a Harman Kardon stereo, and a couple of other bits and bobs. This car's also got premium paint, but no panoramic sunroof. So what you're looking at here is high 60s on road. And to be honest, at that price, it feels pretty complete. We're sitting on 12-way genuine leather seats, which are really comfortable. They also have a massage function, heating and cooling, leather steering wheel with physical buttons. Everything's easy to control. And while the infotainment system does house a lot of software, including the climate control, it's very snappy with good compute power. The climate bar doesn't move. The sliders are now illuminated, and the wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto connection has been rock solid for me. Plus, you can customize the digital instrument cluster with lots of different permutations of information, and you can really get settled in this car. The ergonomics are decent. They're an improvement from the Tiguan Allspace, which felt a bit minivan-like to drive. But for me, the pedals are still a little close and the steering wheel is still a little too far away. So not perfect for me, but you should always test drive cars you want to buy to check that you'll be fully comfortable. Some of the secondary materials are lovely. The Elegance in particular has open-pore wood running all the way across the dashboard, and you can get a light seat color as well, which would look really rich at this kind of price. Heaps of ambient lighting, very customizable, dual wireless chargers down here, and even this kind of gimmicky volume dial, which can also adjust the drive mode. Little Volkswagenisms like a fully adjustable armrest, flockline door bins, and heaps of storage completes the package. Material quality is a significant tick up from the old Tiguan, though some of the cars I drove on the launch of the vehicle did have some faint rattles up front. Oh well, let's check out the second row. Moving to the second row of the Tayron, if you're planning to use this vehicle mainly as a 5-seater, frankly, it's palatial back here. The wheelbase is relatively generous on this car, and that means good legroom in the back. For myself, at 6 foot or 183 centimeters, headroom is good. Legroom's fine, toe room's generous, and you could get someone in the center at a pinch. But where the Tayron is smaller than some rivals is it's narrower, as narrow as a Tiguan. Now, we have air vents down here, a climate zone, heated rear seats on the Elegance, USB-C charge ports, and while the materials do take a bit of a tip down here in terms of the door skins, we have sun blinds, which is nice. And we do read the comments, so Holiday USA 098, let's do the window down test together. And this is a rare car in 2025 where the window, in fact, goes all the way down. We also have a flip-out armrest here. Pull these cup holders out. Very nice. But the main point of buying the Tayron over the Tiguan is the third row. So let's have a look at that. So for kids, getting access to the third row is reasonably easy, but it's a bit tight for adults. But, you know, you can get the job done and you're basically clambering back here, it's then easy to reach forward and reset the second row into a reasonable position. And you know what? As an adult, you do fit back here. Volkswagen concedes this is not for long journeys for adults, but for anyone under about 5'8", 5'9", they'll be fine back here. What they don't get is air vents and USB-C ports, which a lot of rivals do offer in their third row. However, there is airbag coverage back here, and Volkswagen claims the blowing power of the second row vents is stronger in the Tayron than the Tiguan in order to get air back here. So as a nice convenience, this third row is, it's great to have. From the back, the new Tayron initially looks a lot like a Tiguan, but look closer at the details and you'll see that there have been some interesting changes made, from a round to a square fender for the Tayron, and even a complete reshaping of the tailgate with a different number plate cut out. This really isn't just an example of chucking a different badge on the car. Interestingly, in America, the Tayron is called Tiguan, and there is no smaller version of the Tiguan. Not the case in Europe or Australia. Anyway, power tailgate gets out of the way quickly and reveals 850 litres of space in the 7-seat models. A little bit more space than that in the 2-seater, which is the 150 TSI Life. And they've also made these third row seats lighter. So if they weren't sticking on the back of the second row, they would have deployed really easily. And even with those up, there's about a Volkswagen Polo's worth of boot space, which is pretty impressive for a car that is actually not that large in terms of dimensions. Sort of Volkswagen flexing on us with their packaging abilities. You can even put the cargo blind under the boot floor there, and there is a space saver spare wheel and tyre. Not sure that space saver will survive the arrival of the plug-in hybrids next year, but for now, on the regular petrols, you do get one. Now we need to talk about the running costs of the Tayron. The fuel economy of the Tayron is going to depend on the engine that you get. These are bigger, heavier vehicles than the Tiguan, so of course they're going to drink more. And in my testing, the 150 TSI will settle at about 9.5 litres per 100 kilometres in mixed driving, so a bit less than that on the highway, a bit more than that in town. The 110 TSI front driver is going to be a little bit less thirsty, the 195 TSI a bit thirstier. But next year, the plug-in hybrids arrive. A 150 kilowatt and a 200 kilowatt. They're both front-wheel drive, but expect them to deliver about 110 Ks of real-world EV range, and then sip about 6 litres per 100 kilometres once the battery is dead. Warranty on the vehicle is 5 years unlimited kilometres. Servicing pricing can be locked in advance with a pack, so you can, lock in today's prices, and I'll put the price of that on the screen now. Okay, time to head out in the new Tayron to see what this 3-row SUV is like to drive. Well, 3 rows if you choose, because there is potentially a bit of a sweet spot model in the range with just 2 rows and with kind of the Goldilocks powertrain, and that was what I mentioned before, the 150 TSI Life. But what we're focusing on today is the family-focused version, the 150 TSI Elegance, which combines the relative level of opulence that we saw in the cabin earlier with a nice powertrain that is going to suit most family needs. Enough power to load the car up with parents, kids, cargo. You can go to the snow, you've got all-wheel drive, but it's also not overpowered and not drinking fuel at a rapid rate. And that is, of course, the 150 TSI engine in this vehicle. It's a 2-litre turbocharged petrol 4-cylinder engine, making 150 kilowatts of power and 320 Newton meters of torque. So this is kind of the replacement for the old Tiguan Allspace 162 TSI. It's a little bit slower to 100 by about half a second, but it also is a bit easier on fuel. And I got to tell you that out here on real country roads, on the highway and in town, the 150 TSI never feels slow. It actually feels about right. And particularly if you're alone in the car, you can actually make this thing boogie. And that's one of the big differences to the Tayron compared to its close rivals, vehicles like the Hyundai Santa Fe and Sorento and Mazda CX-80, which are a little bit bigger outside, but ultimately quite similar in terms of cabin space and boot space. The Tayron is considerably more fun to drive. The handling of this SUV is basically like that of a fast station wagon. And perhaps that's because Volkswagen has moved its attention away from cars like the Passat wagon, which unfortunately is no longer sold in Australia, but thankfully some of that spirit has made its way into the handling balance of this car. And now the Tiguan Allspace was no slouch in this regard either. It was also surprisingly fun to drive for a 3-row SUV. But if anything, the steering and the handling of the Tayron Tayron is actually even more capable and even more enjoyable than that vehicle. Now, are families looking for an SUV that's fun to drive? Well, not all of them are, but I would suggest if you're watching this review and you've gotten this far into it, you probably care about cars and driving, and the fact that the Tayron lets you have pretty generous 3-row space, but also dynamics that don't make you want to basically get out and stop driving is potentially an upside to this vehicle over some of those rivals. So look, steering's not the last word in like road feel, but the car steers nice and clearly. The ratio running through the electric power steering is intuitive, and the amount of grip, both from the front wheels but also from the chassis holistically, is really high for this segment, and as a result you can have quite a lot of fun driving this car down a tight and twisty B road. But it's also easy to drive with light steering at low speeds for your in-town maneuvers and parking. And then there are things like the ride quality, which is typically something Volkswagen has gotten right on Tiguan's, the old Tiguan Allspace, and particularly the new Tiguan, which rides really quite well. And thankfully that has extended to the Tayron. So what we have here is Volkswagen's second generation DCC Pro adaptive damper system, 15 stages of adjustment, which might be overkill, but you can certainly attune the level of softness or firmness of the ride to your precise preference. For myself, I actually think that Tayron suits ultra comfort, so to the left of comfort, so more comfortable than the comfort setting. It does induce a very flowy ride if you have it at that level. There's a slight amount of torso toss, however, with ultra comfort damping. So I found like on a faster country road, I just wanted to tip the damping up a little bit more towards the midpoint between comfort and sport, which just contained the body control a little bit better, but wasn't unbearable in terms of ride quality. But for my commuting, for my town driving, ultra comfort is really, really nice in the Tayron. The only problem I have with the ride quality is it is a little bit fidgety. It does feel like it's doing a lot in order to generate that comfortable sort of end result. It might be doing a lot, but what it's doing is successful, so that's good. But you do feel quite a few adjustments happening as you're driving along. And the other problem I have with the ride is that it's quite a noisy ride quality in the Tayron. Now, MQB, the platform underneath this car, has always been a little bit hollow sounding in terms of a lack of insulation around the front wheels and the suspension arms at the front. And unfortunately, that has continued into MQB Evo, the sort of update of the platform, and here into the Tayron. You do hear the suspension doing stuff. If you've got your music or a podcast turned up, no issue. But if you're driving along with no sound like I am now, you can certainly hear the suspension working away, which is a little bit distracting. And beyond that, there's probably a little bit more road noise than I would like in this car, but I do think it's gotten a little bit quieter compared to the Tiguan Allspace, which really made a racket in the cabin. But back to the engines. At the moment, we've got 3 to choose from. A 110 kilowatt turbo front wheel drive, which is okay, and particularly if you're looking for a sub 50,000 plus on-road cost spec, it's a quite impressive entry-level motor. But with 7 people on board, you're probably going to want more power. The 150 kilowatt turbo all-wheel drive, which I've got here, I think is a perfect sweet spot. Nice and prompt and quick and okay on fuel in the scheme of things, but not great. The 195 kilowatt all-wheel drive turbo in the top spec R-Line model is a real firecracker. You could never get the Tiguan Allspace with a really powerful engine like that. So in terms of a 3-row Tiguan, it's as quick as they've come. Maybe there'll be an R version in future, but for now the 195 kilowatt really gets the job done. 6 seconds, 0 to 100, really lovely. I suspect that will sell quite well and find a bit of an audience. But I would suggest the 150 TSI Elegance is a sweet spot for families. It's comfortable, it's quite plush, it's relatively quick, and it's fun to drive. So if you do care about getting out on road trips from time to time, if you're gonna borrow the car on a quiet Sunday morning when everyone's asleep and you're gonna go blast through the hills in a 7-seat family SUV, this is probably the one that you want to do that in, and that's actually quite a cool, unique selling point. In terms of other features, the visibility is really good. Big mirrors, big square glass house, thin pillars for a modern car. You can see out of it quite well, and the safety systems are super polished and well tuned. Good lane keep assist, though you can deactivate it. Adaptive cruise is super smooth with more computing power than before. 360-degree cameras nice and clear, and things like the audible speed monitoring, you can turn it off and it stays off permanently. So what's the verdict? Well, splitting out the Tayron from the smaller Tiguan is all about letting these cars shine for their own merits. Volkswagen says the small size of the Tiguan is a selling point to families that just don't have the space for a big SUV. But if you do have more space, specifically more length, and you need a third row that's pretty decent, is pretty kid-friendly, and a big boot, even when you're in 7-seat mode, the Tayron is the Volkswagen option. What Volkswagen is really good at is packaging. So despite the Tayron's relatively small dimensions compared to Santa Fe, Sorento, CX-80, it's roomy inside. The powertrains are impressive, and it's fun to drive, much more fun to drive than the average. However, I suspect the sweet spot might be the plug-in hybrids coming next year. 100 k's of electric range or a bit more, and the flexibility of a turbo petrol engine beyond that. Because if there's a few things you could improve, one of them would be fuel economy, and those plug-in hybrids will do that. Keen to know your opinions? Let us know down below in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.